Sometimes a single crime can stop a whole country in its tracks. And that is exactly what happened in Brazil back in 2001. The person at the center of it all? Patrícia Abravanel, the daughter of the legendary TV host Silvio Santos. The story had it all: wealth, a media frenzy, a terrifying hostage crisis. But here's the thing. The real story isn't just what happened back then. It's about what happened more than 2 decades later, when this whole saga came full circle in a way that nobody could have predicted.
Okay, so just take a look at this. It's like two completely different universes, right? On one hand, you've got 2001, a total Hollywood-style siege. We're talking assault rifles, a massive media circus, a billionaire's family, the works. Then you fast forward to 2024, and the scene is, well, a dingy bar. Illegal slot machines, a bit of cocaine dealing. Seems like night and day, totally unrelated. But what if I told you the man busted in that bar was one of the masterminds from 2001? How on earth does a story go from this epic national crisis to a low-level bust?
And that right there, that's the core puzzle we're going to dig into. How does someone get hit with the absolute harshest punishment the justice system can dream up? We're talking decades in a maximum security prison, only to end up right back where they started. Look, this isn't really just about one guy. It's a story that forces you to step back and ask, what do we even mean by justice? Is our system built to reform people, or is it just built to punish?
So to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to rewind the clock. Let's jump in the time machine and go all the way back to August 2001 to understand the absolutely audacious crime that first grabbed Brazil's attention. The whole thing played out over 10 days of just pure chaos. It kicked off on August 21st with a really brazen abduction. For a week, Patrícia was held captive, the ransom was paid, she was released, and for a split second, it seemed like it was all over. Except, it wasn't. Not even close. A police raid went sideways, officers were killed, and the ringleader, now cornered and desperate, decided to double down by taking her famous father, Silvio Santos, hostage in his own mansion. 7 days. Just imagine that. For 7 days, Patrícia was their prisoner. But what's truly wild here is the sheer nerve of this operation. They weren't hiding her out in some remote cabin in the woods. Nope. She was being held in a house in the exact same affluent neighborhood, right under the noses of a massive citywide manhunt. They were literally hiding in plain sight. And this is where the story just completely explodes into a national spectacle. The ringleader, a guy named Fernando Dutra Pinto, he's wounded after a shootout that left 2 police officers dead. He's totally cornered. So his next move is just unbelievably desperate. He takes Silvio Santos, who is arguably the most famous man in all of Brazil, hostage. For 7 straight hours, the entire nation is glued to their TVs watching this drama unfold live. It only ended when the governor himself had to personally show up and guarantee the kidnappers' safety. So the standoff is finally over, the criminals are in custody, and the public is demanding action, right? They want a strong response. And the state was more than ready to bring down the hammer of justice. In everybody's mind, this was supposed to be the last chapter. Crime, followed by a really severe, decisive punishment. End of story.
And wow, the sentences were definitely severe. The judge was not messing around. He handed down decades in prison. Almost 20 years for the ringleader's brother, 15 for the others. And see, this wasn't just punishment. This was a promise from the state to lock them away and throw away the key. It's a concept they call maximum incapacitation. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just your ordinary prison time. Their sentences fell under Brazil's heinous crimes law. Now, what that means is they were headed for a super strict closed regime prison with basically zero possibility of early release for many, many years. For a public that was totally shaken by the crime, this felt like definitive justice. But there was this fascinating little nuance in the judge's ruling. He specifically acquitted them of being a criminal syndicate. He saw them not as a permanent mafia, but as an ad hoc group. A temporary crew of young people from the city's margins who came together for this one high-stakes crime. And trust me, that little detail, it's going to be important later. The courtroom verdict, though, wasn't the end of the line for the ringleader, Fernando Dutra Pinto. Not by a long shot. A different, much darker form of justice was waiting for him behind bars, one that would make that governor's promise to keep him safe look like a complete and total mockery. This slide just lays out the brutal, grim reality of what happened inside that prison. It started with a fight with a guard. The retaliation was swift and savage, a beating by multiple officers. Then he was just thrown into solitary confinement. For 19 days, he pleaded for medical attention, and for 19 days, he was completely ignored. An infected wound turned into sepsis, and by the time he finally got to a hospital, it was far too late.
And let's be absolutely crystal clear here. An independent autopsy left no room for doubt. This was not an accident. His death was a direct result of physical abuse and what you can only describe as weaponized medical neglect by state agents. The system that promised justice didn't just fail to rehabilitate him, it effectively executed him.
So, with the ringleader dead, the story just kind of faded away. You wonder, what happened to the others? For over 2 decades, there was just silence. And then, a ghost from 2001 reappeared, and the whole case came crashing right back into the public's mind. This chart kind of shows what happened next. For 3 of the 4 surviving kidnappers, the story really does end there. They served their time, they got out, and they just disappeared from public view. But for one of them, the story was far from over. That cycle of crime had not been broken. And then came a twist that sounds like it's straight out of a movie script. On August 21st, 2024, and get this is the exact 23rd anniversary of the original kidnapping to the day, the police raided some nondescript bar, and the man they arrested for running a low-level drug and gambling ring was none other than one of the original kidnappers. The coincidence is it's almost unbelievable. So this rearrest is so much more than just a bizarre coincidence. It really forces us to confront the central theme of this whole story, the profound, massive failure of a justice system that focuses only on punishment. Think about it. In the 23 years that he was locked away, the entire criminal underworld had evolved. The high-risk, high-reward kidnappings of the early 2000s had mostly given way to a new model: lower risk, continuous profit from stuff like digital scams, street-level drug dealing, and illegal gambling. Prison didn't rehabilitate him. It just forced him to update his business model to fit the modern market. And that's really the ultimate takeaway here. Locking someone away for 2 decades without any genuine effort at rehabilitation, it doesn't stop them from being a criminal. It just presses the pause button. The system didn't actually prevent crime, it merely delayed it. He traded in his assault rifles for slot machines, but the game was still the same. This entire case holds up a mirror to a justice system that really excels at punishment, but completely fails at healing. It all brings us back to one difficult but absolutely essential question. After decades of violence, punishment, and repeated failure, we're just left to wonder, when are we going to build a system of justice that actually breaks the cycle for good?